Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name's Yelena Rachitsky. I'm an executive producer of experiences at Oculus. I feel really honored to be here, and I apologize I don't speak French. When I was asking a friend what I should talk about, he said just make sure you apologize for not speaking French. So. First, I wanted to get a sense of the audience of how many people are VR filmmakers here. Wonderful. And for the rest of you, has everyone here tried VR? Yeah, it's pretty incredible how quickly everything's gone, because when I used to ask audiences this a couple years ago, you'd probably get like 5 hands. So how quickly we've gone from so many people not even just trying VR, but actually this is what they do for a living. So anyway, being in France to me is pretty special because France kind of inspired me, especially with places like Arte Interactive. I remember when I was working in film, and I came from participant, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I'd go on to the interactive Arte website, and I always loved this raw experimentation of the form of interactive storytelling, and how the country was just funding it for experimentation and for understanding how to innovate and understanding how it worked, which is something we don't really have in the US. We don't have these funds for just raw experimentation of innovating a form. So it's great to be back here after all this time of a place that really inspired me. So I started off in film, and I used to work in traditional documentaries at a company called Participant Media. I worked on projects like Food Inc. and Inconvenient Truth, Waiting for Superman, projects where I saw in documentaries that film really had the possibility of creating change, of changing people's minds, but I felt a little bit stagnant. I knew that there was something more that I wanted to do, and I wasn't quite sure what it was, but because of Arte, because of the National Film Board of Canada, because of these things that I've been seeing of how people were using technology in these new innovative ways, I knew I kind of wanted to go into this place. I knew that kind of this space of arts and tech, like to me, that's where the magic was, but I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to get a job in it. I didn't know how I really fit into it. So after that, I went on this journey. I worked at Sundance at the New Frontier section. I worked at the Future of Storytelling as their curator program for a couple years. So I spent about 4 years discovering these works from artists and storytellers and creative technologists. And it was this convergence of industries that were coming together all across the globe. And seeing them use technology as this form of artistic expression. But the thing that I always resonated with most was artists that really brought the audience into the experience, where I started feeling like I was a participant, that my body was in a space, that my choices mattered, because for me, that's where I felt most engaged. And I found these artists where they were hacking Connect sensors. So you put your body into space, and how your body moves reacts to something, or the interactive work of Jonathan Harris, or Tender Claws, who created this interactive app called Pry, where you actually move your hand to change the story, or Mimicry, which is another project by Ape Lab, which is out of Switzerland, where they uses this technology, Face Shift, which mimicked your facial expressions, and even though you weren't fully embodied in the experience, you still felt like you transferred over into that image, and the image they had was a creepy baby, so you felt like you became a creepy baby, which was very creepy, but it worked. But all these artists, they had you feel, they had you touch, they had you play. They created this journey, and like I mentioned, you just become invested in that. So, this community was forming. This was a experience I created called Dev Lab, where we brought independent artists with other experts in different fields, like a magician or an experience designer, different artists and installation artists, to talk about how their crafts all converged. But I think, like a lot of people here, there's this energy in this community of innovation, and I think that's why a lot of us are working in this. It's this exciting time of invention. It's this exciting time of innovation and creativity, and we're all kind of figuring it out together, and that's what this journey's been in the past 5 years or so. And we're kind of like, we're here now, in this interesting period, we're exploring all the different Rs, the VRs, the ARs, the MRs, the XRs, and we'll probably have new Rs come up that kind of fill up those in-between spaces, so it'll be interesting. And we're also doing artificial intelligence now, so there's a lot going on. And working in this space means constant shifting and movement. The wheels are always in motion, and you can never get too comfortable. And the thing that I've really learned is that this great stuff happens in these really uncomfortable spaces. So that's really what I do. I work in these uncomfortable spaces. So I work at Oculus, and I've been working at Oculus for about 2.5 years now. It's really felt more like 10 years because of how quickly the space has moved. And VR for me is this convergence space where all those past technologies come together, where creators that used to have to work in location-based spaces and done projection mapping, connect sensors, or people that worked in interactive online stuff can all come together into this one immersive space that really has endless possibilities. And you can also create anywhere, and on top of that now you have the audience. So that's why I'm really excited about VR, because it's so accessible and because you can take all these different art forms and put them into one. And speaking of this timetable, back in 2014, Oculus Story Studio launched at Sundance, and one of the questions they had was, even that basic question of, can you tell a story in VR? And people didn't have an answer to that because it wasn't really done yet. VR 15, 20 years ago was often based in academia and large institutions, but these questions of, can you tell us a story in VR? And now we're in 2018, and I think no one denies that stories can be told in VR. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of a team, the experiences team at Oculus. We've funded and produced dozens of VR projects, and I've personally worked with many creators who continue to surprise and impress us with their progress in VR. And that's a lot of what I do, is I work with creators. I fund them, I oversee their work, I help launch them, and it's really an exciting space. So everything is in support of these artists that are, right deep in that uncomfortable zone. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we work with creators. And it's very much a case-by-case basis. So either we originate idea, we think something would be incredible in VR because we see a lot of stuff, and we also see how audiences respond to things and what people are asking for, and it's still experimentation, but at least we're starting to finally get information about kind of what's working and what's not. It's still very minimal, but we're starting to. So sometimes we have an idea, and then we think about which creator out there, based on all these hundreds of creators now, they keep on popping up every week, I find, might be the best partner for it. And then we put it together with idea, we help grow it, we fund it, we oversee it, and then we help market it, launch it, do all the things from soup to nuts. And other times, a creator or developer, and I think more often than not, a creator or developer comes to us and they have something exciting, and we realize this is something that really needs to get made. So we fund it, and we work very, very closely. We work hand in hand with the creators. We have weekly calls, we give notes on feedback, we give them access to our engineers and to our tech, and give them information about what's coming up. And we've also started figuring out how to try to get attention for VR. I work really closely with our communications team, with marketing team, and obviously we have a store, the Oculus store, where you can digitally launch the work. So really it's from the beginning to the end, and obviously Oculus is a technology company, but the way that we work is very creatively, and it's like a studio within the company, and really we do it purely because we want VR to get better. We're not making money back on it. It's just to figure out how can we continue elevating the craft of VR. And here are just some of the partners that we've worked with, and it's growing. And the way Oculus is also split up is that the experiences team focuses solely on non-gaming, and we also have a studios gaming team that's invested a lot of time and money into big gaming stuff, but our focus really is on narratives and expanding the narrative. So we're really lucky to work with a lot of partners, and we're continuing to work with a lot of partners. And actually, what's really exciting about right now is that in the past 3 years or so, a lot of the things I think we all saw was demos, right? It was using a bit of the gimmick of VR, of your body feels like it's way up high and you're scared of heights, or something scares you, and everything felt like a prototype or a demo. But we're finally in the space where a lot of these creators are on their like third or fourth project and have gotten much more sophisticated, and they're starting to have a strong point of view about what VR means to them. So I think a couple years ago, a lot of us saw these lists of the 10 rules of what you can and can't do in VR. And now we finally thrown those rules out, and you can make VR in so many different ways, and they can all be the right way. There's no right way of what perspective the audience is. You don't need to be first person, you don't need to be third person, you don't really even necessarily need to give a reason why you're there if the piece is compelling and the piece works. So to me, this is one of the most exciting times, because we're finally actually seeing good work. And one thing we're thinking a lot about, because so much about what we do is trying to make VR accessible to a large group of people. So one topic that comes up a lot, which I think maybe a lot of people can relate to, is this concept of mainstream versus independent. And there's a bit of friction between what's mainstream and how to create for the largest possible audience, as well as how independent projects fit into this mix. And this is a topic I think a lot about. Are we creating for the now or experimenting for the future? So a lot of people who have headsets right now at home are gamers, because they're the ones that are going to buy PCs. They're the ones that are going to purchase the headsets early on. And so the response that we're seeing is not exactly accurate for what we're going to probably have in the future when the new products come out and there is a lot less friction with them. So it's important to continue creating independent projects. But can high art be commercial? Can big known franchises also be quality projects? And I think the answers are both yes or no on all of these things. I really believe that independent original projects, they create critical acclaim, but they also need to be accessible for a wider audience, especially if you want VR to get out of our community. And I think we need both this high art of a critical acclaim and also this widespread understanding of VR is. And what is mainstream? I think a lot of people can have different conversations about what that means, but I have this personal way of thinking about mainstream, and to me it's asking my taxi or Uber drivers about VR, because then I know that they're finally outside of my VR community. I think we so easily get into our kind of small circles of everyone creating the same way, and then we think everyone outside of the circle thinks like we do, but really they don't. So I recommend just asking your drivers what they think of the space right now. It's been actually really interesting to see that landscape shift, where a couple years ago when people asked what I did, I had to really even explain what virtual reality was. But the good news is that now every time I ask my taxi or Uber driver or tell them about virtual reality, everyone knows what it is now. So I think that's a great sign. And they are starting to ask more sophisticated questions. But one of the big questions they're asking is, where is everything going? So the way that we're approaching mainstream, this concept of mainstream content is connecting with partners that have a high visibility and already existing audiences, which helps. So we've done a lot of work with Disney, for instance, and we also connect with partners and developers to help actually make the projects. So we've released 3 projects with Disney. Initially, the first one was Moana, the second one was Beauty and the Beast, and the third one was Coco VR. I don't know if any of you guys, has anyone seen Coco VR? And the first 2 were very marketing heavy. I would call them kind of marketing gimmicky content, where it was very short pieces, about 2 minutes, very light interactivity, very much in service of just the marketing plan, but didn't push VR forward. And when we did Coco, it was Pixar's first VR film. And with that, we really wanted to do something different. We wanted to not make something that felt like it was just something marketing on its own, but something that'd be fun, even if it wasn't connected to a big franchise or a big IP. And we worked very closely with Pixar and with a wonderful company, Magnopus, in trying to figure out how do we approach it. And we thought with Pixar, they're master storytellers. We don't want to replicate what Pixar already does for film, which is make incredibly beautiful, powerfully emotional films. And so what was different about VR? And for us, it was all about the audience. So we really brought the audience in. It was audience first. So we made it highly interactive. We took the cues also from Pixar of just this gorgeous, beautiful landscape that they had in the film, which is one of the most beautiful Pixar films I think I've seen, and brought into the experience. But the thing we did was also just bring a level of innovation to it and made it social. So you can be in the space with up to 4 of your friends. And that is incredibly, incredibly fun. And we also released it ahead of the film, so people haven't even seen the film yet. And the response was incredible. I mean, everyone, even people who haven't seen the film or didn't know about it, just loved it, and they had so much fun. It was this combination of high interactivity, but also that you went on this adventure with a friend, so it felt like you traveled with a friend. So this was, I think, a good way of approaching it is working with a franchise, but really, really making sure that there's a reason why you're doing something, and making sure that it's going to be fun, even if someone doesn't even know what that franchise is. So we also did that with Blade Runner 2049. We created a project called Memory Lab, which is also about a 40 minute experience. We also worked with Magnopus on this. And the innovation we created here was working with Microsoft, and we used their holocapture stage. So it's some of the best volumetric capture that was released at that time, which was really good. It is really challenging working with franchises because you always have to work within the world of the story. You can't make stuff up. Everything has to get approved, so it comes with its own challenges. But we were also very, very, very proud of this. And also the NBA. So these, they have their own audiences, and you tack on to their audiences, and it helps create a familiarity to VR for audiences who weren't aware of VR beforehand. But the stuff where I personally love and my passion is these original independent projects. So they're not tied to existing franchises. And these independent creators, they're not limited by creative constraints. They're not limited by existing story world. And to me, I feel like they're the ones that are pushing the envelope. They're the ones that are creating some of the most powerful work. And I feel really fortunate that we're able to continue supporting a lot of independent creators. And we've released maybe a few dozen projects that we've funded personally from our team with these projects. So some of these, this specifically is from Sundance. We premiered 5 independent projects from Sundance. I also think the independent creators are the ones that have kept the industry going. And it's also wonderful bringing back to this public funding, that a lot of this public funding helps offset some of the costs and push this forward. But oftentimes these are the projects that your Uber driver, your taxi driver probably hasn't heard of. Just as an example of some of the stuff that we've made, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but there's a project called Dispatch, and it's about a 911 dispatcher, and you're in the imagination of the 911 dispatcher. And you only see the visuals coming in when you hear the call, and then the world starts forming around you, and it's incredibly thrilling. We broke it up into 4 chapters, so it's episodic, which is a lot. Which we're experimenting with episodic a lot too right now, and trying to think, how do we keep people coming back? But the graphics are minimal, so it leaves room for your imagination, which I think is really powerful and works really, really well. There's very subtle interactivity where things appear depending on where you look, but you don't have choice. It's pretty linear. So a lot of film lovers really gravitated towards this project, and the visual style was really, really powerful. So I recommend watching it. It's out on the Oculus store now. Then Space Explorers is by Felix and Paul Studios, which do some of the best 360 video. And it's this journey through astronauts and their journey of reaching the stars and colonizing Mars. And it's 2 episodes, about 20 minutes each. And it's a 360 video, whereas Dispatch was all made in CG. Wolves on the Walls, which is actually playing at NewImages, is another project we funded that is one of my personal favorites because it explores interactivity and storytelling in a really, really innovative way. You play Lucy's imaginary friend, and the interactivity in here is there, and what I love about it is that it's more intuitive, it's more gestural, so the decisions that you make depending on where you look or what you want to touch or when you decide to listen to Lucy or when you decide to not, slightly shift the way the story unfolds. So it's not obvious like a game where your interactions level up. It's more natural, and to me, I think that's where a lot of interactive storytelling should start going, because it brings more presence in, because it feels more natural to what we do, and that's what VR is to me. It's an embodied experience. It's a natural experience. The more that we can get to the human condition, the better off we're going to be. And what I also love is that they worked with an immersive theater company, and to me, immersive theater connects with VR more than almost any other industry, because they've been trying to figure out how to guide their audience in a way that's not obvious, but make their audience still feel like they have a level of agency. So a lot of the intuitive interactions here come from the knowledge of a company called Third Rail, which created Then She Fell in New York. So if you're ever in New York, it's one of my favorite immersive theater shows. And then Masters of the Sun, we worked with will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas. He actually has his own internal production company making this VR piece, which is pretty incredible, which shows how invested he is. And it's an interactive comic. And then Spheres, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But what's interesting about these 5 projects, and this is just kind of a small sample of what we're doing, is that the point of view of the audience is different for each. You're not first person, you're not third person. It really depends on what the project is. And all of them work in the same way. So your role as an audience member, as a participant, works in every single one of them, but they all approached it in a different way. So I think this proves out the sophistication of VR is right now. So another example of some of the projects that we've put out that are in this independent space, Alteration example of a co-production with Arte, and it's an independent project, and it's been at festivals, and it's won a bunch of awards, and it really helped push storytelling forward. And we also connected them with the Facebook artificial intelligence team to create a lot of the style transfers. So there was this unique innovation and collaboration that was really interesting. And the team Okio is just very talented. Philip, which is a previous project of theirs, was one of my favorites as well. Then 0 Days VR, where you're the embodiment of an actual virus, and it's currently nominated for a Webby Award, so I recommend going online and voting for 0 Days VR. But they were created by a wonderful independent team called Scatter. Then Through You was also a project that is super independent, and they took a lot of chances where, initially in VR, everyone talked about not creating any cuts or not moving the camera. So the directors, Sashka Unseld and Lily Baldwin, decided to throw that out the window, and they moved the camera a lot. And they created a lot of different cuts and took a very, very, very artistic approach with it. And it was, a great experimentation and just really beautifully lit. And then Mayubi was the first 40-minute live-action fiction film that Felix and Paul also made. So, and a lot of the reporters and a lot of the press that watched it just said that they forgot where the time went. So this project really helped prove that you can create long-form VR projects. And then there's these projects that are kind of in the middle of what, like I would say mainstream and independent. So back to Spheres. So we launched the first episode at Spheres at Sundance, and it's made with an independent team, a wonderful female filmmaker, which is also very important to us to create diversity in the space and to fund women and to fund people of color so that we don't, we have a very diverse slate of content made for a diverse group of people. And they also are working with Nova Labs, which is here in France, and a very talented team. And the in-between space with this is that they brought known creators on board. So they brought together Darren Aronofsky, who's the director of Requiem for a Dream, and Black Swan, Jessica Chastain, who did The Voice. And what's interesting is they created, there was a story out of Sundance that came out that they were the first project to have a 7-figure deal come out of Sundance, which is a big deal and is usually reserved for films. So it helped prove that VR is in this industry, and now it's been getting a lot of mainstream attention. So it's an example of an independent project kind of going to the mainstream, which creating this hybrid approach of known people, known creators, topped with press and festival, but also coming from an independent space. And we also do just a lot of experimentations to prove out the form. So an example of this is a project that we made called Fall in Love VR. It was based on a New York Times. It was based on a New York Times editorial. I don't know if any of you read it. That it's based on 36 questions, where there's these 36 questions that if you ask each other, by the end of it, you're going to be in love with that person. Have any of you tried it? No? Yes? So with this, we thought, can you create a natural conversation in VR? And so we used voice recognition software, where you ask a question and they ask you a question back. So initially, we experimented with, they ask you a question, you ask them a question. What we quickly learned is that when you know something's not real, asking you a question, you don't feel as invested in answering. So we shifted it to just you asking them a question. And it was an interesting experiment to realize where we are in voice recognition right now. We're not quite there yet to make it feel supernatural, but it's important to do these experimentations to figure that out. And then at Tribeca's coming up, and we have the second episode of Spheres. We're working with a wonderful filmmaker, Alexander Aja, who made The Hills Have Eyes and Piranha 3D on a series called Campfire Creepers. And then we're also working with Damian Kulash, the lead singer of OK Go, and Chris Milk of Within. It's the way they presented it now is untitled OK Go Within Project, but they're going to reveal the title soon, and it's a music creation tool. So really, we're working in this very broad range, and you'll get to see these soon. And so you make the projects, you fund the projects, you support the projects, but still the big things is getting an audience. So how are we thinking about getting attention for these VR projects where it's hard, a lot of people have a hard time seeing it, a hard time getting access to it. They don't necessarily always go to the festivals. And one formula that we've found to be pretty effective is combining showing it at a premiere festival like a Sundance, a Tribeca, or Venice, aligning that with press. So I don't usually rely on the festival for the press itself because it's chaotic there. You really have to do your own work and create your one-on-one meetings. And it's good to do it ahead of time, maybe like a week or two ahead of time to give them pre-briefings. And then have an embargo date, so when everything launches, it all launches on one date. And then you also launch the project the same date as around the festival. And then you have this big moment. So the press all launches, it's combined with the attention of the festival, and you have a call to action where people can actually watch it. So we found this formula, and we try to also recreate it for our projects, knowing that it's effective, knowing that it provides the most downloads for the projects, it gets the most attention, it's shared the best. So after a few different ways of trying things out for us, we've kind of targeted that as a good approach to take. And I don't know how many of you have seen the project Dear Angelica, which was part of Oculus Story Studio, but we did that at Sundance last year, and it worked really well. I mean, also the project has to be good, or else people aren't going to share it and talk to it. But if the project is great and you follow this formula, it usually works pretty well. And a lot of people usually ask me, what do we look for and we look to support projects? And right now we're shifting our focus to focus more on interactive storytelling and positional storytelling, where you really move around in the space, and thinking about positional. We are also looking for high quality work with people that have a proven track record of making stuff, because we're at a space now where we really need highly polished projects if we want the general audience to want to experience VR. And in this conversation of mainstream indie, we're still definitely working with large franchises because we know that it's a gateway in to get a general audience. But we're also strong supporters of original independent projects, but there has to be a strong purpose to it. It has to really move the needle. There has to be something that we're trying to prove out. So we still have a lot of those on our slate. And we're also focusing a lot now on social co-presence. Of bringing people together in VR, because Coco just worked so well, and we're thinking, how do we continue doing that in storytelling? So, here's, you know, a picture from Coco where two people are in the space together. You're also a fun avatar. There's also Facebook Spaces, which obviously is purely about social co-presence. And so we're thinking a lot about that. But it's actually really, really hard. So when you think about storytelling in general in 360, it's not easy because you can't control how someone works. If you're putting in interactivity, it makes it even harder, because how do you create a story while people are also doing something, because you can't be active and passive at the same time? And then you bring more people into the experience, it makes it even more challenging. So interactive and social and within a large virtual space, I mean, we have our work cut out for us. But you know, back to just the people who are creating this incredible stuff, I mean, it's exciting to be able to support it and to help put that trust in figuring out that challenge, because once it's figured out, it's really where that magic starts to happen, and we're starting to see a lot of that. So just as, you know, a reminder, we should all stay just a little bit uncomfortable at all times so that we continue pushing the medium forward. Thank you.